Let's bring in Mike Sommers now, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, the largest trade association representing America's natural gas and oil industry. Mike, it's a pleasure to have you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. First of all, what are inventories telling us about how tightly supplied or well-supplied oil and nat gas markets are heading into this crucial winter period?
Well, what I'll say, Sri, is that what we're monitoring here, and API monitors this very, very closely, is that we're in a very tight market now. Some of it has to do with inventories, which are at lows, but at the same time, we're seeing continued concern about OPEC and what OPEC is going to produce over this period of high prices. So I was recently at the World Petroleum Congress in Calgary, and there's a real concern about what the supply scenario is going to be going into the winter, both for natural gas and for oil. So that's something that everyone should be watching going into these winter months.
Supply security is paramount. Mike, America's energy safety net, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, 180 million barrels were withdrawn last year to stabilize the markets. The Biden administration has been refilling the reserve. Can you tell us where levels stand in relation to authorized capacity?
Yeah, unfortunately, the United States right now is about at 17 days of supply, about 350 million barrels of oil. As you know, the United States consumes about 20 million barrels of oil every single day. These are at historically low numbers. In fact, we haven't been this low since 1984. And the issue really is that in 1984, we were using 20% less oil in the United States at that time. So these are historic lows. So the Biden administration probably won't be looking toward the SPR for any relief to these high prices that we see right now. Really what we think they should be focused on is increasing the amount of oil that we're producing here in the United States. We're going to be, again, at pretty historic highs in terms of production, but most of that production increase, Sri, is actually on private lands in the United States, not public lands. And we get about 25% of America's supply from the Gulf of Mexico, which is federal waters. We get more in places like Alaska. A lot of that is federal land. And then onshore in the United States, that's about 25% of supply. And we have real concerns about some of the policies that they put into place just recently that are cutting off supply on these federal lands and in federal waters.
Point taken, Mike. And what are stockpiles telling us then overall about the demand picture and the possibility of demand destruction as we creep closer to the $100 a barrel mark?
Yeah, I do think we need to keep a close eye on that $100 mark. We're not seeing any demand destruction right now. We're actually seeing a lot of business travel pick up. We're seeing vacation travel continue to be very high. We're getting closer and closer to the holidays. We expect demand to still be there, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. But this is going to be a real pinch on American consumers and world consumers. So we need to continue to produce here in the United States. Those federal lands and federal waters are going to be a real important safety net for us, which is why it's important that we have policies in place that ensure that we can continue to produce on lands and waters that are federally owned in the United States. So that's a key thing I think that we're going to be watching. Private land development continues to increase. What we saw last week, and we've seen for the last few weeks, is rig counts are actually increasing on private lands, which is a good news story for American consumers. It means that American producers are stepping up to the plate and meeting consumers' demand, which is going to continue to grow, I think, over the many, many years. We're at about 12.8 million barrels of production here in the United States, which is pretty close to that 13 million barrels a day of production, a record high that we had a few years ago. But again, it's mainly on private lands. If we can get those federal lands opened up, we'll have a chance to even increase our production more.
And it's a very challenging call, isn't it, Mike, when you consider the pressure from a decarbonisation point of view, a pressure from the net zero point of view. What can we infer when you look at the longer term supply trends as it pertains to LNG and nat gas about LNG's role as a transition fuel towards net zero?
Yeah, well, I don't call it a transition fuel. I think the truth is that for many countries, it's going to be a destination fuel. I think for particularly countries in Asia, your energy demand is actually going to be going up by 50% in the next 30 years. So we're going to need more natural gas. And the truth is, it is 50% more clean than coal. We want to replace coal. We want to, repeat that energy victory that we've had in the United States, where we've been able to replace coal with natural gas. If we can export that American environmental progress to Asia and the rest of the world, that is a good news environmental story. So we have the supply here in the United States. Just in the state of Pennsylvania alone, there's over 400 years of supply. If we can get that to export markets, that's a good news environmental story for the rest of the world. We've seen it here in the United States, where we've been able to cut GHG emissions faster than any other country in the world. And it's because of that switch from natural gas to coal. But we need to continue to focus on that development onshore and offshore. The United States is the world energy leader right now, but we can do more if we get the policies right. And one of the things that I heard at the World Petroleum Congress is we're going to continue to need these products. We're up to demand of about 103 million barrels every day in the world. And we expect that number to increase. And so the United States wants to be that supplier of choice because of our strict environmental regulations and because of our focus on the development of these properties. So I think this is a good news story, not just for the world consumers who are going to continue to demand these resources, but also it's a very good news story for the environment as well.
Mike, and is the US and our LNG cargoes from the US going to continue to find a home in Europe, especially given the fact that they have now learned some very tough lessons from the Ukraine war and diversifying their choice of suppliers?
Indeed. We were able to, just last year, during that energy crisis that they had, we were able to replace about 50% of Russian gas with American LNG. And we're going to continue to do that because we have the resource here in the United States. If you've ever visited the Gulf Coast in Louisiana and Texas, it's dotted right now with these LNG terminals that are taking American natural gas, liquefying it, and taking it to our partners in Europe. We need to get more liquefaction facilities built, particularly on the west coast of the United States, to serve our Asian partners. We were excited that President Biden visited Vietnam just last week and talked about our commitment to ensuring that Asia has this clean source of energy and natural gas. But we need those liquefaction terminals to make it more cost effective to get it from the American West Coast to Asia. That's a key focus of ours. You're seeing those liquefaction terminals open up in Mexico, for example. There's another one that's scheduled to come online in Canada. But what about the American West Coast? If we can get these sited in California and Washington and Oregon, that would be a huge advantage for American companies and a great advantage to Asia, who is desperate for American natural gas.
Mike, final question. Inventory position at the delivery point for a benchmark light sweet crude futures contract in Cushing, Oklahoma. What is that telling us about supply and demand dynamics?
I think what you're seeing here is that the United States and really the rest of the world are going to continue to demand these products. Cushing is the benchmark. It's also exciting, by the way, that the Brent benchmark now also includes WTI. Those futures and particularly the spot market continue to show that the demand for these products is going to be very large going forward. But that just means that we need to get more supply on the market, and that means we need a little bit looser regulatory environment to open up those federal lands and federal waters to get this supply on the market as quickly as possible, because the demand is there. The problem right now is supply. We're seeing it because of OPEC. We're seeing it because of Russia. America can step into the breach if we get the policies right.
It's a tough one, like we said, Mike, because of the environmental pressures as well. Mike, we'll leave it there. Fascinating conversation, sir. Thank you very much indeed for the time today. Mike Sommers there, President and CEO of the API, the American Petroleum Institute.